The folder on my lap was cold, but my hands were steady. 43 people filled the private dining room at the Fairmont Royal York, Toronto's oldest hotel, where the chandeliers had witnessed 100 years of deals and dynasties. My mother, Patricia, stood at the head of the table looking like she had just won something. She was wearing the pearl earrings my late grandmother left specifically for me. I noticed that immediately. I notice everything. She tapped her wine glass with a butter knife, the kind of sound that silences a room without asking permission. She said she had an announcement. She said that after a great deal of thought and prayer, she had decided to transfer ownership of the Rosedale property to my sister and her husband as a foundation for their future. She called it a legacy decision. She called it love. The Rosedale property. The Victorian townhouse on Cluny Drive that I had purchased 4 years ago under a numbered company after 18 months of 70-hour weeks and 2 consecutive years of sleeping on a pull-out couch in a Scarborough basement apartment. The house appraised at $2.4 million. My house. The room erupted. My aunt started crying. My uncle started clapping. My sister, Danielle, pressed both hands over her mouth like she was receiving a Grammy. Her husband, Marcus, the kind of man who wore expensive watches and paid for nothing, straightened his jacket and smiled the particular smile of someone who just won without playing. I did not move. I did not speak. I held my wine glass and watched my mother perform generosity with someone else's life savings. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. I want to know how far this reaches. My name is Claire and I am 31 years old. I am a licensed insolvency trustee in Ontario, which means when companies collapse, when estates dissolve, when people try to hide assets inside other assets, I am the person the court calls. I have unwound shell companies built by people far smarter and far more desperate than Marcus. I do not experience panic the way most people do. What I feel instead is the particular stillness of someone who has already seen the ending. I looked at Marcus while my mother spoke. He was not looking at Danielle. He was looking at the folder my mother had placed on the table beside her wine glass. His jaw was tight. His right hand was already moving toward it. That is the first tell. Greed moves before the mind catches up. Danielle had been my mother's favorite since we were children, and I had long since made peace with that, the way you make peace with weather. You do not argue with weather. You build a roof. I spent my 20s building mine. A commerce degree from Queens, articling at a boutique insolvency firm in downtown Toronto, passed my CARP designation on the first attempt, built a client roster that now includes 3 of the largest creditor committees in the province. While I was doing all of that, Danielle was doing a lifestyle influencer page that peaked at 11,000 followers, launching a candle company that dissolved in 14 months, and accumulating what I would later confirm to be roughly $380,000 in personal debt spread across 6 credit facilities. Marcus came into the picture 2 years ago. He told people he was in commercial real estate development. What he actually did was act as a finder for pre-construction condo assignments, which is not illegal, but is also not the same thing as development. He had a website. He had a LinkedIn. He had a Porsche Cayenne leased under a numbered company registered in Alberta. These are details most people would not think to check. I checked them the weekend after Danielle introduced him at Thanksgiving. My mother loved him. He called her Mrs. Bellamy and brought her flowers and listened to her stories about her garden and her book club and her opinions about the neighborhood. He was performing a long game and she was a willing audience. I had tried, once, to raise concerns. This was 8 months before the Fairmont dinner. I sat down with my mother in her kitchen in Forest Hill over tea and I walked her through what I had found. The Alberta company. The gap between his stated income and his lifestyle. The judgment registered against him in British Columbia for an unpaid contractor invoice of $62,000. My mother listened with the patience of someone waiting for a commercial to end. Then she set down her mug and told me I had always had a problem with Danielle being happy. She told me Marcus was a good man and I was letting my career make me suspicious of everyone. She told me I should focus on finding someone of my own instead of tearing apart my sister's relationship. I drove home and I made a decision. If they were going to use my work against me, I would use my work for me. The Rosedale property had been purchased inside a numbered company, 2847193 Ontario Inc., which was a wholly owned subsidiary of a holding company registered in my name. This is standard practice in real estate for liability and estate planning purposes. My mother had a key because she had helped me choose the window treatments 3 years ago, and I had never asked for it back. I did not think I needed to. That was my error. What my mother did not know, because she had never asked and I had never volunteered, was that the Rosedale property was not a clean asset. It was a designated monitoring asset. I had been working for the past 11 months as a cooperating professional with the Ontario Securities Commission and the RCMP's Integrated Market Enforcement Team on a file involving a network of fraudulent pre-construction assignment flips in the Greater Toronto Area. The lead target in that investigation had a business partner whose name appeared in 14 of the flagged transactions. That business partner was Marcus. The Rosedale property had been identified as a likely target for proceeds laundering based on transaction patterns my team had modeled. I had not bought that house as a home. I had bought it as a trap. My mother had just handed the bait directly to the rat. She found me near the coat check, her grip on my elbow the same one she had used since I was 8 years old. The grip that meant, this is not a conversation, this is an instruction. She walked me into the corridor near the elevator bank, and she looked at me with the expression she reserves for moments. She believes she is being righteous. She said she knew I was upset. She said she understood it felt unfair. She said that I had everything and Danielle had nothing, and there was only so long she could watch that imbalance and call herself a good mother. She said the house would save Danielle's marriage. She said Marcus needed a foundation asset to access the kind of financing that would finally let him build something real. She said I had worked hard, but so had Danielle in her own way, and that family means sharing, and she had not raised me to be the kind of person who sits on $2.4 million while her sister drowns. She was not apologizing. She was explaining the logic of a decision she had already made and expected me to ratify. I asked her how she had managed to transfer property she did not own. She told me the property was registered to a numbered company, and that she had spoken to a notary who helped her prepare a direction letter reassigning beneficial ownership. She said the notary had told her it was straightforward. She said she had a copy of my shareholder registry from documents she found in a filing cabinet in the Rosedale house during one of her visits. I looked at her for a long moment. I thought about who she was when I was 19 and working a Saturday shift at a call center to pay my second semester tuition after she redirected my respite to fund Danielle's semester abroad in Barcelona. I thought about all the years I had managed the complicated mathematics of loving someone who consistently treated my achievements as a community resource and my boundaries as a personal failing. Then I thought about the folder on the table, and I said, "All right, let's go back in." Marcus was standing when we returned, which told me he was ready to move. People who are confident sit, people who are anxious to close something stand. I walked to the table, and I set down my phone face up, and I looked at him with the expression I use in creditor meetings, when I already know the answer, and I am waiting to see if the other side will tell the truth. I said it was a remarkable gift. I said the Rosedale property was a complicated asset with a lot of history, and I wanted to make sure he understood exactly what he was accepting. He smiled. He said he had done his due diligence. He actually said that. Due diligence. I said I was sure he had. I said the beneficial ownership direction my mother had prepared was sitting on the table, and if he wanted to formalize the transfer tonight, he could sign it, but I needed him to confirm on the record that he understood the asset and its associated encumbrances. He said there were no encumbrances. He said the title search was clean. I said title was clean, yes. I asked about the asset monitoring designation under the Proceeds of Crime and Terrorist Financing Act. The room went very quiet. Marcus said he did not know what I was talking about. I picked up my phone. I said, "Sergeant Okafor, are you there?" The voice that came through was level and unhurried in the way that authority does not need to perform itself. He said he was there. He said they had been monitoring the room. He said the direction letter had been photographed and logged. My mother made a sound I had never heard from her before. Marcus turned toward the exit. He actually turned toward the exit. One of the two plainclothes officers who had been seated at the adjacent table since before we arrived stood up at that point, which answered the question of where he thought he was going. I said, for the benefit of everyone at the table, that the Rosedale property had been designated as a monitored asset under a joint OSC and IMET operation targeting fraudulent pre-construction assignment flips in the GTA. Marcus was a named subject in that investigation. By accepting beneficial ownership of a monitored asset from a non-owning party, he had just committed an act that would be treated as receipt of proceeds of crime under Section 354 of the Criminal Code. by preparing and submitting a fraudulent beneficial ownership direction using documents obtained without authorization. My mother had committed fraud over $5,000, which carries up to 14 years under Section 380. I said this clearly and without raising my voice because I had said versions of it in courtrooms and creditor meetings, and that is what it sounds like when it is not a threat. It is a description. Danielle was looking at Marcus. She was not looking at me. She was looking at him with the expression of someone doing arithmetic. They do not want to finish. I almost felt something watching her arrive at the answer. Almost. My mother said to tell them it was a mistake. She said to fix it. She said I had the power to make this go away, and she was my mother and she was asking me. I said I was a licensed insolvency trustee and an officer of the court and a cooperating professional on an active federal file, and there was no version of this I could make go away. Sergeant Okafor and his colleague approached Marcus at that point, and the table cleared the way that people clear the way when something official is happening and they do not want to be adjacent to it. My aunt had stopped crying. My uncle was looking at the tablecloth. The friends my mother had invited to witness her generosity were gathering coats with the efficiency of people who had somewhere else to be. Marcus did not go quietly, but he also did not go loudly. He said it was entrapment. He said I had set him up. He said I had used my own family as bait, and that was sick. He said that word specifically. Sick. I said I had done nothing except own a property, do my job, and decline to warn a fraud subject that he was under investigation. All three of those things were entirely legal. They walked him out. My mother followed as far as the corridor, talking to the back of Sergeant Okafor's jacket, her voice cycling through indignation and then pleading. And then a bargaining tone I recognized from the years she had tried to manage me the same way. It did not work on him either. I went to the coat check. I collected my coat. I put it on in the lobby under the original 1929 ceiling plasterwork, which is one of the things I have always loved about that building. History that holds. Danielle found me at the door. She looked the way people look when a version of reality they had been maintaining at significant personal cost has just become impossible to sustain. She asked me if I had known the whole time. She asked if this had been a plan. I told her the truth, which was that I had not planned for tonight specifically. I had planned for Marcus specifically. I had done that because I had tried the direct approach with our mother, and our mother had chosen to interpret professional judgment as jealousy. So I did the thing I am trained to do. I built a file. I let it develop, and I protected my asset while I waited. She asked why I had not warned her. Her voice cracked on the last word, and for a moment, she was not my entitled sister who had taken everything offered and resented me for not offering more. She was just a 34-year-old woman who had bet her life on the wrong person and lost. I told her I had tried to warn her. I told her I had tried to warn our mother. I told her what I had found and what I had said and what our mother had told me in response in her kitchen over tea. Danielle already knew our mother had dismissed my concerns. She did not deny that. She looked at the marble floor for a long moment. She said she was sorry. She said it like she meant it, which was not nothing. But sorry is not a check, and $380,000 in debt does not disappear because a person's husband gets arrested. Those were problems she would have to solve with different tools than the ones she had been relying on. I told her she should call a licensed insolvency trustee. Not me specifically, for obvious conflict reasons, but someone in the field who could walk her through a consumer proposal. I told her it was not the end of the world and there were legitimate pathways through it. That was the most I could do, and I knew it. I walked out onto Front Street. April in Toronto is cold. The way to city is cold, directly and without apology. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and looked at the CN Tower lit up against the sky and thought about my grandmother's pearl earrings, still in my mother's ears, and decided that was a problem for another day. I got in my car. I drove north. I stopped at a Tim Hortons on Yonge Street because I had not eaten since noon, and I sat in the parking lot with a medium dark roast and a plain bagel, and I read through the preliminary arrest report that Sergeant Okafor had forwarded to my secure inbox. Everything was in order. Every number lined up. Every flag I had planted over 11 months of careful, methodical work had caught exactly what it was designed to catch. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that. What I felt was the specific exhaustion of someone who has been carrying a load they should never have been asked to carry, setting it down in a parking lot in April, in the dark, in the city where they built everything they have entirely alone. I blocked my mother's number before I finished the bagel. Not in anger. In clarity. There is a difference, and it matters. I drove home to my apartment in Leslieville, the one I actually live in, modest and mine, with a west-facing window that catches the afternoon light perfectly and a bookshelf full of insolvency law texts and one shelf I keep for novels because I am a person and not just a professional. I made tea. I sat in the quiet. The Rosedale property is still mine. The numbered company is intact. The investigation will proceed through the courts over the next several months, and I will cooperate fully as I have done from the beginning. My mother will face the fraud charge, and she will hire a lawyer, and it will be difficult and expensive, and I will not be paying for it. The pearls are a problem for another day. But tonight, in my apartment, with my tea, I felt something I have not felt in a very long time. Not happy exactly. Not relieved exactly. Something quieter than both of those. The feeling of a life that is only yours. The feeling of a lock on a door that only you have the key to. The feeling of having been told, for your entire childhood, that your work and your effort and your judgment were communal property available to anyone who needed them more than you did, and discovering, finally, at 31, in the best way possible, that they were wrong. I am a licensed insolvency trustee. I close files for a living. Tonight, I closed the oldest one I had. I have spent a lot of time thinking about what the word family actually means when it is stripped of sentiment and examined the way I examine everything. Honestly, without the comfort of what we wish for true. What I have come to understand is this. The people who take from you without asking are not taking because they are evil. They are taking because they have never once been made to stop. Every time someone absorbs a consequence for them, every time someone stays quiet to keep the peace, every time someone sacrifices what they built to smooth over what someone else broke, the lesson being taught is that there are no lessons, that the world is soft and accommodating and will continue to give regardless of what is given back. My mother did not decide to commit fraud in a single evening at the Fairmont. She arrived at that table having spent 30 years practicing a smaller version of the same logic. She practiced it on my college fund. She practiced it on the hours I worked while Danielle slept in. She practiced it every time she reframed my effort as luck and Danielle's failure as circumstance. By the time she pulled that direction letter out of a folder and announced it to a room full of people, she genuinely believed she was doing the right thing. That is not an excuse. That is a precise description of what happens when no one builds a wall. I built mine late. I will not pretend otherwise. I spent too many years hoping that if I worked hard enough, achieved enough, became enough, the people I came from would eventually see what I had made and respect it. That is not how it works. Achievement does not generate respect from people who have decided your success is their resource. It generates appetite. What changed me was not anger. Anger is loud and expensive, and it burns through the person carrying it far faster than it ever touches its target. What changed me was deciding to treat my own life with the same rigor I bring to my work, to look at the evidence clearly, to stop filing away the data that contradicted the story I wanted to be true about my family, and to act on what the numbers actually said. Integrity is not a feeling. It is a practice. It is the daily decision to be the same person in private that you are in public, to hold yourself to the standard you hold others, and to refuse to participate in arrangements that require you to pretend you do not know what you know. I knew what Marcus was. I knew what my mother was enabling. Staying silent would not have been kindness. It would have been complicity with a different face on it. Resilience is also not a feeling. It is what you build when the people who were supposed to protect you did not. It is the degree from Queens you fund yourself. It is the designation you pass on the first attempt. It is the apartment in Leslieville where the afternoon light comes through the west window, and everything in it belongs entirely to you. I do not know what happens to my mother now. That is genuinely true and genuinely strange. But I know what happens to me. I go to work, I close files. I come home to a life that no one else has a key to. That is enough. That is more than enough. That is everything.